And dear viewer, buckle in because this is going to be a wild ride. Tears of the Kingdom is a little over 2 years old now, so it's a good time to take a look at what's been developing for the Any% speedrun. In this video, I'll be commentating over one of my runs and explaining all the tricks as we go that allow us to beat the game in under 40 minutes. So without further ado, let's get started. Here's some notes as we load into the game. First, this run is done on version 1.0 because of access to glitches that are either not available on later versions or have faster setups on version 1.0. We live in an era where most modern games get patched, and the speedrunning community has to decide how to handle these differences. The Tears of the Kingdom community voted to split the leaderboard by version, so there's a separate leaderboard for current patch runs, and if you want to see me do runs of it or make a video explaining it, let me know in the comments. And second, I'm playing on a Switch 1 since the Switch 2 can't play version 1.0. The shenanigans begin immediately, because much like he did in Breath of the Wild, Link completely ignores Zelda and clips out of bounds. So while the game starts with a fairly simple prologue section with very limited options, we still have ways to spice things up. It requires a very precise lineup on the wall, but if you can do that, all that's left is to press X to jump. This is the first 1.0 exclusive glitch, because they made a slight change to Link's climbing in 1.1. It's extremely dark, so it's hard to see, but there's actually nothing here besides the tunnel, since this is an entirely different map than the overworld. So despite the out of bounds clip, there's no way to skip the prologue. But there are cutscene and dialogue triggers throughout that extend slightly out of bounds, so with some precise jumps, we're able to avoid them, saving about a minute over normal gameplay, because Zelda is a bit of a yapper. Now, coming up would be the nearly 4-minute unskippable upheaval cutscene. But nowadays runners are allowed to skip this with either a mod that removes the cutscene from the game, or by backing out and loading a save made in the Room of Awakening. Feel free to have your own opinions on intro skips, but personally it's made running and watching Tears of the Kingdom a lot more fun since I came back from a nearly year-long break, partially motivated by burnout. You might have noticed the Russian text. That's because I'm Russian through the game, and Russian has the smallest number of text boxes, making it 1 second faster than English. Other categories have more cutscenes and dialogue though, so the fastest language isn't always the same. Now we get to work breaking the intended sequence of the game again. With a very precise jump, we can just barely reach the upper ledge of the Room of Awakening, which is normally inaccessible at this point because the walls are unclimbable. The reason it works is another case of moving backwards being faster than moving forwards. But this time, it's that turning around mid-air and jump slashing maintains Link's momentum instead of resetting it, allowing us to keep that running momentum to go further than normal. We call this cog skip because we skip the cutscene for activating the cogs, and getting it first try is pretty coggers. The repeated unsheathing of the sword is this game's version of whistle sprinting, but it's more annoying and less effective. By leaving through the back, you might expect us to complete or activate the recall shrine early, but despite the minor sequence breaks we've done so far, this game is really strict about the order you complete the Great Sky Island. None of the shrines are active until visiting the Temple of Time, and recall isn't even active until a second visit, so we'll have to come back later. But that does beg the question, why not leave the intended way if we can't do the shrine? Besides the movement being a bit faster, we're actually after the Zonai wings in the chest at the top. Wings are incredibly useful since the Sky Islands are very open, so being able to fly directly between them saves a bunch of time. Also, because this is version 1.0, you can sneeze and it'll probably duplicate your items. So the 3 wings from the chest are effectively infinite. We use Zonai sort duping, which is where you take out a Zonai device in a spot where there isn't room to take it out, and then sort your inventory as you close it, which causes a duplicate copy of the device to be put back into your inventory. We need 20 to 25 wings for the run, which goes to show how useful they'll be. Also, for anyone wondering what happens if you fly away from this cutscene on a wing, they've placed void out zones surrounding the island to prevent you from escaping. As we wait for the title card cutscene, it's time to prepare for my favorite trick in Tears of the Kingdom speedrunning. It's really flippin' cool. And while it may look like we're just winging it, the setup actually makes perfect sense. Items that you drop will be given the same momentum that Link has to make things feel more fluid. So if we dive straight down and place a wing with all that downward momentum, it'll be placed at such a steep angle that it flips over, and by stalling with a jump slash, we can grab onto the side of it for a split second to reset Link's height coordinates for calculating fall damage. Then we can place a second wing and land on it without dying for a safe flight to the construct. But we're not done yet. The wing flight is slightly faster than running on the ground, but the real reason it's important is that this whole section is a floor is lava situation. When Link voids out, he's placed at the last position he was touching what the game considers to be solid ground. Standing on a Zonai device doesn't count, since that's variable, and could easily be a wing flying in the sky, which wouldn't make sense as a respawn point. So as long as we stay on wings until we void out, we'll be able to respawn all the way up at the top island, which makes getting to the Ascend Shrine a lot faster than climbing all the way up. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. For now, we're getting the Purapad from the construct. This time around, the cutscene is actually pretty tame, but because Link is on top of the wing, his model gets slightly displaced from where it's supposed to be, so you can see his thumbs cutting into the Purapad a bit. There are times where Link isn't even in the picture, and there's just a floating tablet there. Once we're done talking to Stuart, we need to place another wing down so that we can fly to the Temple of Time. On the way over, we unequip the Decayed Master Sword in preparation for a glitch called Sword Shift Duplication. The flight's a bit tricky since we're aiming for the construct so that the wing has enough momentum to kill it, while being low enough on contact to be able to grab the sword and shield without them falling under the wing. During the text box from picking up the broadsword, we pause, sort our inventory, which changes the positions of the weapons, and then equip the Decayed Master Sword that's now in the position the broadsword was in, which desyncs it. So in the inventory, we have the Decayed Master Sword equipped, but in the overworld, we have the broadsword. I'll get into why this is important later, but for now, this hit and run situation has netted us a shield and a more usable weapon. The wing bridge we built is pretty precise since the game puts Link in a specific spot during the cutscene, and will move the wing out of the way if it's too close to the door. But we need Link to remain on the wing once the cutscene is over, so this is the perfect placement. But now we've activated the shrines and can immediately dive off the edge of the Great Sky Island and magically respawn all the way at the top. Which means that we can descend to ascend. Here, we fly a wing and then crouch dash off the front and immediately shield surf. The lunge forward gets interrupted midway through so that Link gets a burst of speed, and the shield surf preserves Link's momentum, which would normally instantly decay. The combination of wing flight plus dash make for pretty fast horizontal movement, considering we don't have a lot of tools to work with. But at this point, we don't have the paraglider, so we once again have to grab the wall as a way to negate fall damage. It looks super scary, and that's because it is. The potato shape of the shrine is very easy to accidentally land on and make Link go splat. The first 14 or so minutes of the run are brutal, since they're filled with very difficult tricks that lose a ton of time, especially given the amount of unskippable cutscenes this game has. Kinda weird that they've forgotten how to add the skip option when it was there as recently as Breath of the Wild. But now it's time for the first shrine. We've picked Ascend first because its high up location makes it perfect for getting to the next shrines quickly, and with our floor is lava technology, this is the fastest we'll be able to get here. Although, if I recall correctly, there's only been 1 or 2 any percent routes that don't do Ascend first. So even in the early days, we were climbing up the mountain at the start and making our way back down. The inside of the shrine itself is usually very straightforward, as a tutorial for using the ability. But so far, nothing in this speedrun has been straightforward, and we're gonna keep it that way. First, we throw our weapon to resync the inventory, and turn the Decayed Master Sword into a rusty broadsword. This completely gets rid of the Master Sword, but luckily we can still progress the story. I guess Zelda isn't picky about which Decayed Sword she's restoring. Having 2 rusty broadswords makes the menuing for this next glitch a bit faster. We're performing a dynamic zuggle, which is a glitch that duplicates Link's equipped item onto his model. So while it looks like Link has 1 weapon, it's actually more than that. This has a few useful effects. like increasing our damage dealt, and if we duplicate enough, we can overload the game since Link is only supposed to have a set number of items attached to his model and can't handle having too many extra. For 1.0, the threshold is 10 extra weapons, and at this point the game breaks a bit, leading to equipment desyncs, which we'll be using to set up the next glitch. But first, we kill Billy with the force of 11 swords and pick up the bow. By jumping, we can unequip and re-equip the bow while in the text box to duplicate the bow using overload, and having 2 bows allows us to set up arrow smuggle, again using overload. Arrow smuggle is the state where Link's bow is desynced from his model. In this case, it's attached to his feet, and the reason it's so powerful is that while it's active, you can instantly cancel jump slashes by drawing the bow beforehand. Repeat this with the right rhythm, and you can fly, which will be the main movement technique we'll be using throughout the rest of the run. In this shrine, it doesn't actually help that much, but if you're fast enough on the setup, you can catch the moving platform on an early cycle that skips having to use Ascend to get to it, saving a bit of time bypassing the ability's animation. And that's the first shrine done. Unlike Breath of the Wild, we're not able to skip the end of shrine cutscene the first time we encounter it. This is actually a good time to shout out Bewildebeest's recent video about downtime in 3D Zelda speedruns. So if you're curious to see how much of Tears of the Kingdom speedrunning is cutscenes, or want to see how it compares to the rest of the 3D Zelda speedruns, go check it out. You might see a familiar face while you watch it. And of course, now that I've called attention to the length of the cutscenes and loading screens, you're hyper aware of how long this wait really is. Luckily, it's only the first shrine's cutscenes that are unskippable, and the rest will be completely normal. I was kind of hoping that the Switch 2 would be able to play 1.0, since then the run would have less downtime, making it more condensed and therefore more fun to run. But we're stuck on the Switch 1 for now. And now that we're out of the shrine, we can make our way over to Fuse, but with a quick pit stop at the bottomless cave for a bomb. Not to be confused with the pit cave, which is just around the corner. One of the many useful parts of Arrow Smuggle is that we can do a really fast fall damage cancel by diving as Link is still rising from a cancelled jump slash, which comes up a lot since we won't be getting the paraglider at all. But while we aren't getting the glider, we will be getting a different key item. By throwing a wing capsule with the right lineup, we can hit one of the rafts by the river, which activates the construct's dialogue to give Link the battery. We won't be using it at all, but a construct gives it to you after the next shrine if you don't already have it, except with 20 seconds of extra dialogue, so this is huge savings. On the wing, we duplicate a couple of bombs in a similar fashion to the Zonai devices earlier, but this one's a mid-air sort dupe because you hold, sort, and close your inventory while shield surfing or diving mid-air. Then we shield surf off the wing for the extra momentum, and turn around before jump slashing for the same reason as Cog Skip. Link's momentum is preserved by the jump slashes, so we can continue to fly backwards really fast. Mixing in shield surfs in between is a slight time save because it preserves momentum a bit better than not shield surfing, but I also like doing it because it's more satisfying when you get to press more buttons. Bonus points if you land right in front of the shrine like I did this run. We do Fuse second mainly because it's the next closest shrine, but as an ability it's by far the most useful, being pretty much the only one we use multiple times, and you'll see why in just a bit. But now that we're inside of the shrine, we get another set of grunts by Rauru. For the really astute out there, you might notice that those are English hmms, and not Russian hmms. We don't actually hear any proper voice acting in this run because I skipped the intro cutscene, which means you can choose whatever voice language you want without losing time. And I went with English voice acting because I figured during attempts I'd get fewer questions about the language. This was pre-intro skip. It didn't work. Shoutouts to Chris Hackney though, he's the GOAT. With Fuse, we can start using bomb jumps. But first, we need to duplicate more so that we'll have enough for the rest of the run. For the strats I use, I need a total of 9 bombs, which I do in 2 dupes. The first one using a shield jump, and the second using a dive out of a bomb jump. Then we drop down and grab arrows. We don't need another bow, but the arrows allow us to shoot a bomb arrow at the chest with the key, so that it bounces off the back wall and back towards Link. After which I start wasting more of the arrows because we want to have 0 arrows to avoid entering bullet time when using Arrow Smuggle Flight. But we do need at least one arrow because it contributes to overload, which we need to duplicate our single bomb shield. After we get the second shield, we just need to jump and swap shields a couple times, which I do with the full menu because ironically, they made the quick menu in this game not so quick. This leads up to the Captain Construct skip, where we bomb jump over the cutscene trigger of the enemy down below. The trigger extends nearly to the ceiling, so the flight has to hover right at the top, otherwise it doesn't work. It's not a huge time save, but in a game like this, we have to skip all of the cutscenes we can. That includes the rest of the shrine cutscenes, since they only force you to watch the first one. Another difference between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom shrines is that you're allowed to skip the cutscene immediately without getting a slower load. If that doesn't sound familiar to you, then go watch my Breath of the Wild commentated run to learn more. This next flight to get to the Ultrahand shrine might be the hardest in the run. We do a setup with jumps and parries to make sure that Link's position is perfect, so that the bomb jump hits the slope at just the right spot to get sent to the shrine with maximum speed. Arrow Smuggle Flight will only maintain Link's momentum, so having these setups give as much speed as possible is super important. The reason this one is harder than the rest is because Ultrahand is actually 52 units higher than Fuse, so we have to gain a fair amount of height by the end. Because we're using jump slashes to fly, each repetition only gains a very small amount of height, and it only does that if we keep up a fast enough rhythm. I used to use a metronome, but recently I've learned a visual cue where you use Link's feet overlapping as the signal for when to do the next jump slash. It's an oddly soothing beat, and if done correctly, Link lands right in front of the door to the next shrine, which is extra satisfying. Ultrahand is, of course, the only shrine left, so it's not like we have a choice for which one to go to. I mentioned there being a couple routes that didn't follow the current Ascend Fuse Ultrahand shrine routing back in the day, and they were instead built around using Ultrahand to build flying contraptions to fly between shrines using copious amounts of Zonai charges. I might be mixing up my history a bit, but if I'm not mistaken, there was one called Only Fans that got some fans from a chest to fly a fan-only contraption all the way to Ascend. I'm glad we don't have to worry about that anymore, but I'm still waiting for someone to cook up a Fuse first route. Inside the shrine is pretty simple this time around. We just fuse a bomb to our shield and then run over to this slab in the corner. There's a setup to land on the very edge of it that gives a ton of speed and narrowly avoids hitting the corner of the wall to make it to the end of the shrine in one go. It's a deceptively large time loss to not get a super low launch, so the lineup is worth taking time on. Once you get the flight started, if you fly low enough, you can have Link's back hit the rail, which will redirect him to the monk, saving a couple seconds, but is pretty difficult to do consistently. This is where I like to point out that we've just completed the Ultrahand shrine without using Ultrahand at all. It's a really good showcase of how potent a good bomb jump on a ledge can be, especially when paired with Arrow Smuggle Flight. Also, this was one of the bigger time losses in the run with the failed ledge bomb. I'll run it back at some point, but it's still a pretty clean run. Since this was the last of the shrines, Rauru tells us to go to the Temple of Time again, which is conveniently right next to us since we saved Ultrahand for last. The game points you towards Ultrahand initially since it's the closest to the temple, but because we had such a fast way of getting back to Ascend, we're able to loop back to it at the end for a short flight. This time we use a wing bomb, not to be confused with a wind bomb, to get a nice launch angle towards the door. There are a few different methods for the wing drop, with varying levels of difficulty and speed, but the crouch dash version is the fastest and coolest. Inside the temple, the movement seems pretty standard, but we make sure to activate the cutscene by touching the stone as close to it as possible. For some reason, this makes the load faster, which to this day I'm not exactly sure why. There's a few spots where this kind of load manipulation happens, which might just be a 1.0 only thing, since it wasn't as optimized as later versions. But a time save is a time save. Speaking of loads, while a lot of people assume that loading time is always cut out of speedruns, that's not really the case. PC games will often have load remove time, but for console runs it's a lot less common, since it's easier to remove load times on PC, and it's also more important to do so, since people's hardware will vary a lot more. It's still not great that load times are a bit random on the Switch for Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but it has its complications. To progress the game and unlock the recall shrine, we have to try to open the door. Except you don't actually have to try, since it's faster to just mash B and give up immediately, which I find hilarious. Uraru is probably befuddled by Link's lackluster attempt, but then again, this Link does things a little bit differently. Uraru will then show you on the map where to warp, and finally unlock the ability to do so. Before this point, you can't warp anywhere, which wouldn't really affect routing since warps are slow anyway. But now that we can, a small optimization here is to jump before opening the map to warp. The first time you open the map, there's a short cutscene where Link looks at the slate, and jumping avoids it, saving a second or two. We are a bit lucky that we can even warp to the Room of Awakening, since we skipped activating the terminal in there, but I'll chalk it up to more Zonai magic. Now that we're back here, it's time to actually do the shrine. And thankfully, with more abilities and resources, we don't have to do any parkour. But I'd like to point out that the forced backtracking that the Great Sky Island has is the main reason the speedrun is so much longer than Breath of the Wild. You'll see it pretty soon, but the endgame is nearly as fast as Breath of the Wild's, so a lot of that extra time comes from the more rigid early game that forces multiple visits to the same location with extra cutscenes and warps. Inside the shrine, we immediately get going because we already have the ability. The bomb jump we do is really smooth because we can shield surf on the sand and then equip a different bomb shield to immediately bounce off the ground at a pretty nice angle. This shrine is on a cycle because although we're skipping the rafts that would normally determine how fast you can get through the shrine, there's still the clock hands at the end to worry about. That being said, you can use Ultrahand to move and stick the hands together, so it's not supposed to be a big deal if you mess up. Except with the game overloaded, Ultrahand isn't able to move objects, which is why the camera zoomed out weirdly when I attempted it. I could have unequipped my shield so that I'd be under the overload threshold so that Ultrahand would work again, but I didn't think of that in the moment since I rarely mess it up. Ultrahand is supposed to be slightly faster than Recall here since it doesn't stop time at all, saving a few frames. Now that we've actually completed all the shrines, we've got one last trip to the Temple of Time. But first, we need to head to the Amiibo Casino. I'd like to point out at this point that gambling is bad. The odds are stacked against you, since each Daruk scan has only a 20% chance of being the gem you need, but the dopamine hit of a first try topaz is pretty insane, and saves a solid 30 to 40 seconds over the guaranteed ruby in the cave below Recall. Amiibo usage is contentious for a lot of people, but there is a no Amiibo category, so it's okay to think that Amiibo usage should be banned, but understand that runners will do it because it's allowed and it's faster. The gem itself will be used in the army later, and if you've experimented with gems in your own playthrough, you probably already know why. And now it's time for our final visit to the Temple of Time, and we're using the same movement to get there. Except this time, there's a tutorial for how to take materials out using the quick menu, which we've been doing the whole time. It's not really a problem at all, but the timing of the wing drop does get changed slightly, so it takes some practice to get used to. Then we do another bomb jump strat with a precise lineup, so that Link bonks his head into the ceiling at just the right angle so that he gets sent diagonally towards the door at the end. I don't think it was this one specifically, but there was a strat called the Canadian Concussion that used the same head bonk and was figured out by some of the Canadian top runners, of which there are quite a few. Honestly, compared to everything Link had to go through in Breath of the Wild speedrunning, the tricks in this game are pretty chill. Just a few light bonks on the head to jostle the brain. This time around, we can catch in the extra heart and open the sealed door. It's actually pretty trivial to get to the other side of the door since you can climb or fly to the backside of the temple, but the cutscene at the end only triggers if you've opened the door, so again, no cheese for completing the Great Sky Island early. Although, there is a great video by Timber about how to skip the Great Sky Island through extensive use of glitches that I'd highly recommend checking out. It's not speedrun viable, but it's always interesting to see how people break games. To get to the cutscene, we've got one more neat ledge bomb setup where we place a wing and then jump and do 4 parries to line up for a nice low launch to the end. With the tutorial out of the way, the game opens up to become the vast open world that we all know it was supposed to be. Except this isn't any percent speedrun, so there's only one place worth going, the final boss. But the way we get there might surprise you. When I talked about dynamic zuggle and overload earlier, I described it as the way we get the equipment desync required for arrow smuggle, but there are faster ways to set that up that don't require duplicating 10 weapons. The thing that makes this route so special is that the extra setup time at the start is the glue that holds the whole run together. Right now, we're aiming for a very specific set of coordinates, because at the overload threshold, mounting anything will disable collision between Link and the ground, clipping him out of bounds. So instead of going through the tunnels beneath Hyrule Castle, we can get there much quicker thanks to our dear friend. This leaves us pretty far from Gloom's approach, so we use the wing plus crouch dash tech to make it the rest of the way. Since we're moving in a straight line, we've got plenty of time to duplicate the gem that we grabbed earlier, which we'll be using shortly. We need 20 to 25, which I mostly dupe in small batches, since we have to catch the gems mid-air before they get too far away from Link. I could probably be a bit more optimal about the dupes, but as long as I'm not missing the inputs, it's good enough for me. The duplication glitches we use are super easy, but getting the right timing every single time is somewhat difficult. The angle we flew the wing is perfect to find a specific part of the out-of-bounds walls that lets us consistently clip back in, since in this game, walls are two-sided. This is done using a ragdoll clip, where we forcibly ragdoll Link by unequipping the shield he's surfing on, which will clip him back in bounds if he has enough momentum. And now, with one more wing flight, we've made it to the final stretch of the game, which includes the Demon King's army, a boss rush, Ganondorf, and the final cinematic fight to finish things off. The Demon King's army is an exciting build-up towards the final fight, but in speedruns it plays out a little bit differently than a casual playthrough. This is the reason we duped so many gems, because while there's a bunch of enemies to kill, they made gems have a massive AoE explosion that deals a ton of damage. We use recall between gem throws to cancel Link's throwing animation, since normally he does a follow through, but by using an ability, it cancels it and lets us throw the next gem quicker. This might not seem like a big difference, but over the course of 20 throws, we end up saving a little over 10 seconds. Having the army fight right before the end is super convenient, since it's a free way to stock up on strong weapons and fuse materials before fighting Ganondorf. Without them, we'd have to route something in along the way that would lose time. We're also trying to be strategic with when we pick up the materials, because the transition between army phases doesn't happen instantly. But picking up a new item forces the next phase to load in as soon as possible, and since we're picking them up anyway, we might as well use that to our advantage. The other thing to note is that while this looks extremely simple, it's also very easy to mess up, since the gem explosions are in some cases inches away from hitting Link. Slightly misaligning a throw or having the Lizalfos jump in the way instantly kills the run, where your respawn point is the Great Sky Island. It's like we did a Flora's lava section, except in this case there is nothing exciting about the trip back up. And now for a thrilling boss rush. As a way to reward the player for having completed the temples, the sages show up and fight these bosses for you. But because we skipped all that, it's Link versus the world. Dying would reset us back before army, so the stakes are high. Except this game is broken, so we're gonna skip all that with some more out-of-bounds clips. We grab some arrows and then drop off the side. Then we use a jump slash cancel clip to get out of bounds. This is where you cancel a jump slash with Link's head right below the ceiling, so that the small jump clips him halfway through, and a shield jump or extra jump slash finishes the job. But if you can skip the boss rush, why not skip the army? And that's because there's a flag to check for the army's completion before Ganondorf will spawn, but that same check doesn't happen for the boss rush. I do think that it makes the run less interesting to watch, but that's why there's a glitchless category to get that same rush of excitement. We have one more arrow smuggle flight, and this one is really tough. The tunnel is super cramped, so you need a fast rhythm, and with all the Gloom and Colgare's attacks, there can easily be lag spikes that eat up your inputs. But it brings us to the final showdown. The Rusty Deer route comes to a close with the Ganondorf fight. The 10 Zuggled broadswords enabled Arrow Smuggle to fly through Hyrule's open airways, gave us a super fast overload clip to army, allowed us to clip out of bounds to skip the boss rush, and is finally rounding things out by increasing our damage output versus the big man himself. The reason the Zuggle stack is so effective here is that when you fuse to Link's main weapon, it fuses that same material to all the Zuggled weapons. So it's not just 10x a 10 damage weapon, we also get 10x the boss Bokoblin Horn as well. I also snuck in an extra D-smuggle with the Royal Broadsword without explaining it earlier, but that's also counted for damage. What's interesting is that Zuggled weapons working against Ganondorf is a 1.0 exclusive thing. They made some change in 1.1 so that Zuggled weapons essentially don't work against Ganondorf, even though they work against every other enemy. A fun side effect of skipping the boss rush is that you get to listen to Colgera's music during the Ganondorf fight, but it's such a banger that you can't really be mad. And just like that, with the power of 10 Rusty Broadswords and a couple extra Royal Broadswords, we have just enough extra damage to take him out with no durability to spare. Which is also a time save, because Zuggled weapons introduce some complications during Demon Dragon. It's just one more reason the route feels so perfect. But now that that's over, we get a bit of a break before the action continues. The calm before the storm. Because Demon Dragon is one of the hardest sections of the run with almost no room for error. From a glance, the dragon fight seems pretty similar to the Dark Beast fight from Breath of the Wild, in that both are a cinematic finale where you're not really in any danger of dying. It's kind of just an auto-scroller with a cool atmosphere. But while Breath of the Wild's final boss is just that, an auto-scroller with very little the player can do to go faster, in Tears of the Kingdom it's a lot harder, with so many things that can go wrong. Personally, I'm a fan of how chill the Dark Beast fight is for Breath of the Wild, since it's the victory lap after an absolute gauntlet of difficult tricks, but I can see why it's an underwhelming end to the run. For Tears of the Kingdom, my nerves are typically the highest while I'm waiting for the loading screens to finish up, since any mistake from here on out loses a minimum of 40 seconds. There have been many resets right at the end, but that just makes the PBs that much sweeter. The strat we use is called 2-cycle, because the goal is to destroy the 4 weak points along the dragon's body in 2 movement cycles of the Demon Dragon. The position of the dragons are, as far as I know, completely consistent as long as your actions are the same every time. One of the best things about Tears of the Kingdom speedruns is how consistent they are. Other than the amiibo scans earlier, the rest of the run is under your control, and all you need to do is practice. Not to say that the tricks I've shown are easy, the early game is particularly difficult, but at least you don't have to worry about bad luck during an attempt, especially if you run no amiibo. We first drop off Zelda as soon as possible, and then do a few jump slashes to get to the first weak point as the dragon stops moving. Here it takes 4 hits with the Master Sword to destroy the weak point before we immediately run up this corner of the crater to get launched to the right. This sets up perfectly for a mid-air wing drop, so that we can fly to the second weak point. On the way, we fuse the Lizalfos horn so that we can destroy the rest of the weak points in 3 hits, because these small time saves make a difference. Based on Link's positioning while jump slashing to the first weak point, Zelda will either be moving clockwise or counterclockwise, and the setup you use for the next part depends on which way she's going. In this case, I wait a bit so that she comes towards Link from the northwest, so that when she picks up Link, she'll be in the right spot so that it can drop off and dive directly to the next weak point as soon as the dragon stops moving. The reason these cycles are so strict is that the dragons are huge, and that might seem obvious, but if Zelda moves slightly in the wrong direction, it's almost impossible for Link to make it far enough to reach the weak point, especially since we don't have the glider. Then there's the fact that we're not really supposed to be destroying 2 weak points per cycle, so to move between them before the dragon moves again requires landing as soon as possible, otherwise you'll just get knocked off. And once the final weak point is destroyed, we're still not done. At this point, we have yet another branching setup based on the direction Zelda is moving. In this case, she moved counterclockwise, which means we can use a slightly faster strat where we dive down to Zelda immediately, and then she'll be in the perfect position so that dropping off at 2,200 units, will put us right above the demon dragon's head so that we can land faster than normal. And to finish things off, we do a really cool blade beam wall jumping backwards to break the secret stone. But it isn't just for style points. Another fun quirk of 1.0 is that dealing that final blow while standing on top of the dragon's head causes an 8-second black screen as opposed to the normal transition, so the blade beam is an easy way to avoid being on the ground. Before we end, I want to give some huge shoutouts to everyone who's been involved with routing Tears of the Kingdom speedruns, since this was all their hard work. People like Airgol, Flower2, Calamity Link, and many others have created something beautiful, and I'm grateful to be able to run it and share it with you all. But that's the end of the speedrun. The timing ends on catching Zelda's hand, and that's how speedrunners beat Tears of the Kingdom in under 40 minutes. Although, funnily enough, because of intro skip, I've only taken up 35-ish minutes of your time, so thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, make sure to let me know by leaving a like and subscribing, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.